Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Stand Your Ground Studio. This is Scott. Today I'm going to do a little bit of an extension on what I did yesterday. And what I talked about yesterday was they released some information about Nixon's aide, John Ehrlichman, coming right out and saying Nixon's war on drugs targeted blacks and anti-war leftists or hippies. And CNN came out with the exact same report today, and then they released two other articles at the exact same time. You know what this is about. You can go back to my last video and discuss that. Again, what this is all about is I think in the future they're going to release some information about 9/11 and a whole bunch of corruption in our midst in an attempt to externalize the hierarchy. But first, they need to reveal some corruption in the past to make it relevant and to act as a framing device for what's coming. So, a couple of articles here. I want to skim through them real fast. These are the other two that were loaded up with it. And they're from last August, and what they do is they talk about a lot of issues going on at the time, and every single one of them, they post an article from that time, so they're kind of inviting you to explore the past with them. And it's a lot of stuff that relates to the present day as well. I won't go over too much, but Ford pardons Nixon. It's all about the great big division, falling wages, rising prices. It's all the economic crisis, which kind of sounds a lot. They pick snippets that sound a lot like what we're going through. As you can see here, it's like they're quoting articles from the 70s, kind of bringing the past back up. This article right here, kind of the same thing. It focuses more on Vietnam War, but every single issue it brings up, it posts an article from that time. But what I really wanted to talk about is the Pentagon Papers. And like I said, I think a lot of information is going to come out soon that's going to reveal a lot of corruption. And when all these new terrorist attacks hit and the war in Iraq and Afghanistan keeps dragging on, there's going to be a great big demand for how did we get here and where are we going, which I've already seen in other articles. They literally are posting that. The MacGuffin of it all, that's a script writing term. You take a great big how or why or what and turn it into an item that can be found. I think it'll be the 28 missing pages from the 9/11 report. And here's something about the Pentagon Papers. Now, when I talk about these, I'm going to jump into this article from 1971. Just think about all the really shocking parallels between what was happening in the 70s and what's happening right now. And you're going to get a sense of what I'm talking about. They can easily use this as a framing device to reveal what's coming to us so people accept it more readily. So as I read it, think about these themes. Whistleblowers revealing secret information, a long drawn-out war, the establishment having an agenda before going into the war, the White House not listening to Congress or the CIA, they're kind of creating their own reality, projecting the image of getting in too deep and severely misunderstanding the situation, threatening the media to remain hushed about secret findings. So if you haven't seen it, back during the Bush administration and the war, they're starting to reveal that the NSA had a big program going on. There's plenty of footage of Bush threatening publications not to come out with their reports to show the public because he kept saying if this brings an attack onto U.S. soil and it kills anyone, their blood is on your hands. And then he would give them a very icy stare. There's interviews of owners of publications backing down saying, I didn't want to be a part of that. So let's jump in. Here's what it's about. Daniel Ellsberg, a U.S. military analyst back in the 60s, 70s, turned against the war and released thousands of top-secret Pentagon files about the war. The papers revealed that top U.S. officials were told in advance how long, costly, and improbable a victory would be in Vietnam. So think about the Bush administration and their agenda to go into Iraq even before Afghanistan, and probably even before 9/11. Let's dive in. And this is the very first paragraph they put in this report from June of 1971, from the guy who released the papers. To see the conflict and our part in it as a tragedy without villains, war crimes without criminals, lies without liars, espouses and promulgates a view of process, roles, and motives that is not only grossly mistaken, but which underwrites deceits that have served a succession of presidents. So this is all about not acknowledging a lot of crimes and corruption in high places. We need to acknowledge it. We can't just sit here and be quiet about it. And it underwrites deceits that have served a succession of presidents. So this stems way back, multiple presidencies. So this is a longer agenda. This is talking about what was revealed. Those records afforded a rare insight into how officials make decisions affecting the lives of millions as well as the fate of nations. The view, however, constricted or incomplete, was deeply disconcerting. The process revealed a dismaying degree of miscalculation, bureaucratic arrogance, and deception. It goes on to talk about how it does get released, and the Nixon administration tries to pounce on it and sue the publications, but they end up drawing more attention on themselves. quick paragraph here about all the information that managed to get out, and it really kind of sounds like Edward Snowden and how much information he was able to get out. Just a parallel there. Okay, so this paragraph here is, each step seems to have taken almost in desperation because the preceding step had failed to check the crumbling South Vietnamese government. So this is how they're getting deeper and deeper, and all they do is just apply more force, tightening the screws and putting themselves in a harder situation, and how they kind of having a hard-headed agenda, and they, almost no one said, wait, where are we going? Should we turn back? They kind of had their own reality going on. This right here kind of expands on that. It's how getting a peek behind the scenes made people realize it's not what we thought was going on behind the scenes. So as documents bared the planning process, they also demolished any lingering faith that the nation's weightiest decisions are made by deliberative men, calmly examining all implications of a policy and then carefully laying out their reasoning in depth. They convey an impression of harassed men thinking and writing too quickly and sometimes being mystified at the enemy's refusal to conform to official projections. So this is people kind of out of touch with reality. So here's a quick quote that I just had to put in because the spiritual side always seems to manage to creep in. So this is building on what I just said, and this is a quote about the Viet Cong. Not only do the Viet Cong units have the recuperative powers of the Phoenix, but they have an amazing ability to maintain morale. I know the Phoenix just manages to pop up there. This paragraph right here is a pretty big one. One Vista revealed a U.S. government far less interested in negotiations on either Laos or Vietnam than its public stance indicated. In fact, the U.S. sought ways to avert international pressure for talks. It continually withheld from the American people full disclosure of its increasing military moves against North Vietnam. So they weren't telling the American people what they were doing. They were already finding ways to bomb targets, even with civilian pilots, before they even told the American public what they were really doing. They had the public persona of we're going to talk about this and we're going to see what the best route is, and meanwhile they were already going after their agenda. And if you remember from earlier videos, I've posted articles, the Hillary emails they came out with saying that Bush and Blair were saying that to NATO and to other countries and to America and Britain. We're, the exact same thing. We're looking for avenues. What's the best approach? Meanwhile, these documents are revealing a full year in advance. They're saying that's what we're saying, but this is all a military approach. That's the end goal. Whatever has to happen, that's where we're going. So that was a sharp parallel there. It does go on to talk about the CIA and John McCone, who I've mentioned in other videos. This is a little bit different. This is about how the CIA gave them information they needed to hear, and they just totally rejected it. So he's a conservative Republican who believed the U.S. had to try for a knockout blow in Vietnam or get out. He argued constantly against the consensus policy of gradual escalation. And in his assessment, he's saying, just think about the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, what's going to happen if we do it this way. Therefore, time will run against us in this operation, and I think North Vietnamese are counting on this. We can expect requirements for an ever-increasing commitment of U.S. personnel without materially improving the chances of victory. We will find ourselves mired down in combat in the jungle in a military effort that we cannot win, and from which we will have extreme difficulty extricating ourselves. I doubt I really need to explain myself there. In a sense, McCone and the CIA were only doing what they were paid $600 million a year to do, provide accurate information to guide the American policymakers. And down here is just a quick expression of how Secretary McNamara doesn't listen to Operations Chief, and who expresses doubt about what's going to happen. McNamara asks why. He says, it's just a feeling. McNamara gave him a stony stare and later ordered, don't ever let that man in here again. It's that disconnect of, no, we know which way we're going, don't tell me that. No defeatism here. Alright, so what lessons can be lifted from all those pages of secret papers? The most instructive revelation may be how little faith the leaders had in those they led, a classic case of arrogance of the powerful. The deceptions and misrepresentations stemmed from a conviction that the public would not face up to the harsh realities of Vietnam. Check this one out. Even within the government, sound intelligence estimates were often rudely ignored if they failed to fit policy preconceptions. There was a self-deception that if the U.S. unfailingly demonstrated its determination to persevere, Hanoi would buckle. But the North Vietnamese always knew that the struggle was ultimate for them, peripheral for the U.S. Alright, now this paragraph right here, just think about what they're alluding to is men in high places, and they had agendas long before we ever went in. The man who directed the Pentagon study, this guy, recently declared in a foreign policy article that the question is not why did the system fail, but why did it work so tragically well? The men who had decided that Vietnam must not fall into communist hands, and almost all of our leaders since 1949 shared this conviction, dominated the decisions. So again, that relates back to that first paragraph I talked about. It stretches across multiple presidencies. I'm going to end on this right here, and this is going forward for us too. Whether Daniel Ellsberg has advanced the end of the war by his transmission of the stolen documents remains doubtful, but his larger purpose may yet be served. If the government and the public come to understand the atmosphere, the pressures, the false and strained hopes, and the futile decisions that pervade the whole secret history of Vietnam, the wrong decisions may not be made again, or at least not so easily. And that's exactly why I'm bringing this up, because they're going to use all this to say, you know what, it's too late for the 60s and the 70s and what happened back then, but before we get pulled into more of a war or another war, we need to start investigating how we ended up in this war right now. And we're going to have an enemy that kind of pops up, when, the secret societies and all that starting to pop up. And this is going to be a larger scenario, but what I've been talking about is in the mix, and I keep pointing out the Bush administration because they were the driving force behind the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and the overall response to 9/11. As we've seen in my last few videos, the system likes to pin as much corruption and wrongdoing as they can on one bad guy or a group. And we saw how poignant that is with Trump. It's easier for people to understand the message and have someone to blame. And all this is going to start popping up again as we start getting hit by more terrorism and we start getting pulled further into war. And even just today, after the Brussels attack, they're already telling us it's on its way. Here it comes. So that's the note I'm going to end on here. There's a lot more I could have gone over, but the video just gets way too long. If you see anything on this topic that you like, share it with me, post it, and let's explore it together. Times are going to get rough very soon, so stay vigilant and be prepared. Thank you very much for listening. I'll talk to you next time.